The bells of St. Bartholomew's rang at 9:45. Nora Voss heard them from the bridal suite on the second floor of the Ritz-Carlton, through a window that looked out over Central Park South. June sunlight was pouring in like the city had decided, just for today, to be on her side. She was standing in front of a full-length mirror in an ivory silk dress she had saved for herself. No help from Graham. No help from his mother. Just 22 months of setting aside a small amount every time a freelance invoice cleared. This dress was hers. Entirely. Completely hers. Jolene Park stood behind her with 2 cups of coffee, already in the dusty blue bridesmaid gown, already dangerously close to crying. 72 degrees, Jolene said. 0 clouds. I checked 4 times. Nora took the coffee. Looked at herself. Didn't she look like herself? Not a performance, not someone assembled for an occasion. Just Nora, 30 years old, from South Philadelphia, who had built her life in this city with nothing and somehow built it anyway. At 10:04, while Jolene pinned the last section of her hair, Nora heard the voice. It came from the hallway, or the stairwell just past the door to the left. Old buildings carried sound in strange ways, and the Ritz-Carlton was over 100 years old. At first, she thought it was a guest. Then she recognized the laugh. Low, private. The laugh of a man who thought no one was listening. She knew that laugh. She had heard it in the dark of their apartment on Sunday mornings, when something was funny and Graham wasn't trying to hide anything. Nora set down her coffee cup, crossed the room in 4 steps, put her palm flat against the door. She heard her name. Once. But the way he said it, not like a woman he was about to walk toward, like a problem he was explaining to someone else. She turned around, walked to the vanity, picked up her iPhone, opened the voice memo app, pressed record. The little timer started. She walked back to the door and stood there in her ivory dress and her house mother's pearl earrings, and she did not move. 4 minutes, 12 seconds. When she stopped the recording, she placed the phone in her small white clutch and closed the clasp. Nora, Jolene whispered. I heard him, Nora said. Her voice was calm, completely, terrifyingly calm. We can leave right now. Nora picked up her bouquet of white peonies. I want to go to church, she said. Not to marry him, to finish this the right way. Jolene stared at her, then picked up her own bouquet. Okay, she said. I'm with you. She always had been. Nora Voss was 7 years old when the police officer crouched down in front of her in the hallway of a hospital in South Philadelphia and told her, in the careful voice adults use when they are afraid of children, that her parents were not coming back. She remembered the linoleum floor, the smell of antiseptic, the way the officer's badge caught the fluorescent light. She did not cry. Not then. She had learned very early that crying in front of strangers used up something you needed to keep. What happened next happened fast, the way bureaucratic systems move when a child becomes a case number. She was placed in emergency foster care that same night. Her baby brother Elliot, 18 months old, barely walking, with their father's dark eyes, was placed separately because there was no family home with 2 available beds. They told her it was temporary. It wasn't. She spent the next 11 years in 3 different group homes. The first 2 she did not like to think about. The third one, on Carpenter Street in South Philly, had a house mother named Ruth who kept orchids on the windowsill and wore gold drop earrings and called every girl in her care my girl, without exception. Ruth was the first adult who made Nora feel like she was a person rather than a file. When Nora aged out of the system at 18, Ruth pressed a $20 bill into her hand, a Greyhound bus schedule, and a folded note that said, "You are smarter than you know, and you are going to be fine." She kept that note. It lived in her desk drawer in Astoria, Queens, sites still folded along the same creases. She moved to New York with $40 and one contact who never answered his phone. She figured it out anyway. Community college, then freelance writing, then a small client list that grew slowly and steadily over 8 years. She bought a second-hand MacBook Air and paid it off over 18 months. She found Jolene in a community college communications class, the only person in the room who also brought her own coffee. She looked for Elliot every year, filed paperwork, sent inquiries, hit dead ends. He had been adopted at 2. The records were sealed. She never stopped. When Graham Ashford walked into her life at a client dinner in Midtown, she was 27. He was 33. He had a warm laugh and knew how to listen, which was rarer than money. She didn't fall for the money. She fell for the feeling that someone had finally, actually seen her. That was the thing that would hurt the most later. Not the betrayal itself, the precision of it. Graham Ashford was the kind of man who made you feel like the most interesting person in the room. That was his gift, not his looks, though he was handsome in the particular way of men who have always been comfortable in their own bodies. Not his money, though there was plenty of that. Old money, the kind that didn't need to announce itself. His gift was attention. He gave it completely, and he gave it like it cost him nothing, and when it landed on you, you felt it. He and Nora met at a dinner for a real estate client she was writing copy for. She was there to take notes and quietly disappear. He was there as an architectural consultant. He sat next to her at the far end of the table and spent the entire evening asking her questions about her work, her city, the stories she liked to write, the way she had learned to talk to people. He texted her that same night. Something small, something that referenced a specific thing she had said. She noticed the specificity. She always noticed that. They dated for 3 years. He was consistent in a way she had never experienced. Calls when he said he would call, plans kept, problems discussed instead of avoided. For someone who had spent her childhood waiting for the next disruption, consistency was intoxicating. He proposed on a rooftop in Tribeca on a Wednesday evening in December, which was not the kind of grand gesture she would have expected from him, which was exactly why it worked. A Tiffany box, a clean solitaire, a speech that was honest and a little clumsy and completely his. She said yes before he finished. But now, in the car on the way to St. Bartholomew's Church, clutch in her lap, recording locked in her phone, Nora found herself remembering the things she had chosen not to look at. The Tuesday and Thursday evenings when Graham worked late and came home slightly too relaxed for someone who had just left the office. The way his phone always faced down on the table when they ate dinner together. The name Sabrina, mentioned once at a firm party, and the microsecond of stillness in Graham's expression when a colleague said it too loudly. She had filed those things away, chosen not to open the file. She had wanted this too much. She understood that now. She sat in the car with her white peonies in her lap, and she understood it completely, and she felt, under the grief, something else entirely. Clarity. Patricia Ashford had been managing her son's life since he was 17 years old, and she was very good at it. She was 62, slim, and possessed of the particular composure that came from decades of knowing exactly which rooms mattered and exactly how to behave in them. She wore her silver hair in a clean knot. She wore a pale gold dress to her son's wedding because ivory was for brides, and she had not forgotten that distinction. She had not been hostile to Nora. That was important to understand. Hostility was crude. Patricia didn't do crude. What she did was quieter and considerably more effective. She forgot Nora's coffee order. Every time. Across 11 dinners. She asked about Nora's freelance work, with the precise inflection that made it sound like a hobby. She told a story at Christmas dinner about a woman she had known who came from difficult circumstances, and how admirable it was when such people found their footing. And she said it while looking at Nora with an expression of complete warmth in front of 12 guests, in a way that was impossible to object to. Nora had sat with that one for weeks. She mentioned it to Graham once. He said his mother didn't mean anything by it, that Nora was being sensitive. The conversation ended there. What Nora did not know, what she was still assembling in the car on the way to the church, was that Patricia had known about Sabrina Lane for 8 months, not as a problem, as a preference. Patricia had met Sabrina at the firm's winter gala the previous December. She had spent 40 minutes talking with her. Sabrina was from Connecticut, old money, the right schools. She was the kind of woman Patricia had always imagined standing next to her son. Polished, familiar, legible. Patricia had not told Graham to end things with Nora. She had simply made sure Sabrina kept being available. And she had placed Sabrina in seat 17 of St. Bartholomew's Church, 3rd row from the front, on the groom's side, for reasons she would never have to explain out loud, because she had never done anything that required an explanation. She was sitting in the front row right now. Back straight, hands folded, watching the door at the end of the aisle, waiting for her son to get this done. In the car on the way to St. Bartholomew's, Nora opened the voice memo and listened to the recording for the first time with headphones in, one earbud only, turned low, while Jolene sat beside her pretending to look out the window. The first 20 seconds were ambient noise, the creak of the stairwell door, the sound of a man settling against a wall, the way people do when they're making a call they need to be comfortable for. Then Graham's voice. "Hey. Yeah. I know. Listen, I need you to stay in your seat today. I know it's hard, but once this is done, we're back to normal, okay? We've talked about this. Nora she's not. Look, she doesn't know anything. She's fine." A pause. "Don't say that. Come on. You know what this is for me? Family stuff. My mother, the firm. It's complicated and I've explained it. You know how I feel about you." Another pause. Longer. "After today, nothing changes between us. I promise. Now please, I need to focus. Text me when you're seated." The recording ended 22 seconds after that, with the sound of footsteps moving away and a door closing. Nora pulled the earbud out. She sat with the city moving past the window, and she let herself feel it, the full weight of it, for exactly 40 seconds, because 40 seconds was what she allowed herself before she needed to think. He had said, "Once this is done, we're back to normal." The wedding was a performance. She was the prop. She thought about 3 years, the specific texture of them, the Tuesday evenings when he came home relaxed, the phone always face down on the table, the microsecond of stillness at the name Sabrina. She had cataloged those moments and filed them, and now she was reading the file. She thought about her dress. 22 months of invoices. She thought about the pearl earrings from Ruth, who had died 3 years ago in a hospital in South Philly, alone because the group home system didn't produce a lot of people who visited you at the end. She was not going to cry in this car. She was going to walk into that church, and she was going to do this correctly. "You okay?" Jolene said, without turning. Nora smoothed her dress over her knees. "I will be," she said, and she meant it. The car stopped 2 blocks from the church to let a delivery truck clear the intersection, and that was when Jolene turned around. "Tell me what's on that recording." Nora looked at her. "Tell me," Jolene said. "So I know how upset to be." Nora told her. Not everything, but enough. The voice. The name. The line about getting back to normal after today. The instruction to stay in her seat. Jolene sat with it for about 4 seconds. Then she said, "Stop the car." "Jolene, I'm serious. Stop the car, we get out, we go back to the hotel, you take off that dress, and we order room service, and we never speak of Graham Ashford again. That is the correct response to what you just told me." Nora watched the delivery truck pull away ahead of them. The car began moving again. "I'm not doing that," she said. "Nora, he's in there right now, at the altar, waiting for you to walk down the aisle so he can marry you as a cover story while his girlfriend sits in the 3rd row." Jolene's voice was completely controlled, which meant she was at maximum fury. Jolene got quieter when she was furious. It was one of her most terrifying qualities. "But tell me how walking into that building is the right choice." "Because 200 people are in there," Nora said. "His family, her family, the partners from his firm. Everyone who has spent a year looking at me like I was something he'd brought home that didn't quite match the furniture." She paused. "I want them to hear it." Jolene stared at her. "The recording," Nora said. "I want every single one of them to hear it." A long beat. "Okay," Jolene said slowly. "So your plan is to walk down the aisle, let him think everything is normal, and then give the phone to the priest when he asks if anyone has an objection." Jolene looked at her for a long moment. The church came into view through the windshield, stone and tall and permanent looking. Exactly the kind of building people chose because they wanted to feel like what happened inside, it would last. "You know I'm going to need to physically restrain myself," Jolene said. "I know. From the moment we walk in until the moment you hand over that phone." "I know." Jolene exhaled, fixed one last hairpin. "Then let's go," she said. Elliot Voss had almost not come. He had received the wedding invitation 2 months ago, a heavy cream envelope with a Park Avenue return address, forwarded to him from an old college contact of Graham Ashford's, who had found Elliot through LinkedIn. Graham was apparently the kind of person who invited peripheral acquaintances to his wedding. Elliot was apparently the kind of person who got classified as a peripheral acquaintance because they had been in the same structural engineering seminar at Penn 15 years ago, and Graham remembered everyone. Elliot had set the invitation on his kitchen counter in his apartment in Crown Heights, Brooklyn, and looked at it for 6 days. He had moved to New York from Chicago 3 years ago, partly for a job, and partly because a social worker in the Pennsylvania system had told him, in a phone call he had replayed 100 times, that his birth sister's last known residence had been in New York City. The records were complicated. The name on file might have changed. But she had been placed somewhere in the Philadelphia system, same as him, and the trail went northeast. Her name, before the foster system changed her file, was Nora. He had been searching for 6 years. Online registries, letters sent to agencies, a DNA profile on every platform that offered one. No match, no response. He came to the wedding because he had no plans that Saturday, and because staying home alone felt like giving up. And Elliot Voss had stopped giving up a long time ago. He sat in the 3rd row, groom's side, in a charcoal gray suit he had worn to 2 job presentations and a funeral. He checked his phone. He accepted a program from a smiling usher. He did not open it for several minutes. When he did, he looked at it the way you look at something that takes a moment to process. The groom, Graham Ashford. The bride, Nora Voss. He read it again. Voss. He looked up at the altar. He looked back at the program. He read the name a 3rd time. Voss. It was not a common name. It had been his name. It had been their name. His and the sister he had been separated from when she was 7 and he was barely walking. He sat completely still in the 3rd row of St. Bartholomew's Church while 200 people murmured around him and a string quartet played something soft and elegant. His hands were not steady. The doors of St. Bartholomew's opened at exactly 11 o'clock. The string quartet shifted from background music to something that had a shape to it, a direction, and 200 heads turned toward the back of the nave. Nora walked in alone. There was no father to walk her down the aisle. There never had been. She had decided months ago, when Graham gently suggested a family friend could escort her, that she would walk by herself. She had walked into every room in her life by herself. She was not going to stop today. She walked slowly, the way she had practiced, though she had not practiced for this. She kept her eyes forward. The peonies in her hands were steady. She was aware of the faces on either side of her. Graham's mother in the front row, back perfectly straight, pale gold dress, the expression of a woman watching a transaction complete itself. The partners from Graham's firm, the Connecticut relatives whose names she had memorized for a seating chart she had spent 2 weekends building. She did not look at the third row. She looked at Graham. He was watching her from the altar with the expression she had fallen for 3 years ago. Warm, slightly overwhelmed, like she was the best thing that had ever walked into a room. He smiled at her. It was a good smile. He had practiced it too. She understood now. Or perhaps it was genuine. Perhaps he was capable of both things at once. She reached the altar. He took her hand. His hand was warm. "You look beautiful," he said quietly, for her alone. She said nothing. In the front row, Marcus Webb watched them. He was Graham's best man, had been Graham's closest friend for 20 years, since they were undergraduates together at Penn. He was standing to the right of the altar, and his job right now was to look supportive and hand over the ring when asked. But Marcus had been watching Graham for 30 seconds, and something was wrong with his face. Not with Nora's. With Graham's. A stillness just below the surface of the warmth, the expression of a man who was waiting for something to be over. Marcus had seen that expression before. 6 months ago, over 2 glasses of scotch at a bar on Park Avenue. He had tried to say something about Sabrina. Graham had shut it down in 4 sentences. Marcus had let it go. He had been trying to forgive himself for that ever since. In the third row of the groom's side, seat 17, Sabrina Lane sat with her hands in her lap and watched Nora walk toward the altar. She was 29, dark-haired, and wearing a dove-gray dress that was technically within the acceptable range for a wedding guest and had been selected with considerable care. She had a program open in her hands that she was not reading. She had not wanted to come. She had told Graham that twice. The first time he had asked her to trust him. The second time he had said it was important that she be there, that it was one day and then everything would be different. And she had believed him because she had been believing him for 11 months and the habit was hard to break. Patricia Ashford had called her personally 4 days ago. Sabrina had been surprised to receive the call. She had met Patricia once at the firm's winter gala, and they had spoken for 40 minutes. She had liked her. Patricia was composed and direct, and treated Sabrina like someone worth talking to. The call was brief. Patricia said she thought it would mean a great deal to Graham to know that Sabrina was there. She said she understood it was a complicated situation, but that she believed, when the dust settled, things would work out as they should. Sabrina had understood what Patricia was offering without either of them having to say it plainly. She came. Now she sat in seat 17 and watched the woman in the ivory dress reach the altar, and she felt, for the first time since this had started, something that was not anticipation. She felt something closer to shame, because Nora Voss did not look like a story Graham had told her. She looked like a real person. She walked by herself down the center of that church with her flowers and her straight back and her quiet face, and she looked like someone who had earned every step. Sabrina looked down at the program. She thought about the things Graham had said about Nora over 11 months. Small things, designed to make her seem diminished. Less than. Not quite right. She looked up at the altar. She looked at Nora's hands, which were perfectly still. She looked at Graham, who was smiling. Something cold moved through her. She opened her program and stared at the words without reading them. The ceremony proceeded the way ceremonies do. The priest was a man in his 60s named Father Callahan, who had been officiating weddings at St. Bartholomew's for 23 years and had developed, over that time, the particular skill of reading a room. He had felt something unusual when the bride walked in, a quality to her stillness that was different from nervousness. He had noted it and continued. The readings were given. The vows were read. Graham said his with confidence and eye contact. Nora said hers in a clear and even voice that did not shake. Then Father Callahan arrived at the part of the ceremony he had recited thousands of times, the part that, in his experience, passed without incident because it was tradition rather than invitation. He looked out at the 200 gathered guests. If anyone present knows of any reason why these two should not be joined in marriage, he said, let them speak now, or forever hold their peace. The room did what rooms do at that moment. It held its breath. It prepared to exhale. Nora stepped forward. She stepped forward calmly, the way she had stepped into every difficult room in her life. Without performance, without hesitation, with the specific economy of someone who had decided before she arrived. She opened her white clutch. She took out her iPhone. She held it up so that Father Callahan could see it clearly, and she looked at him with an expression that was not angry or shaking or theatrical. It was simply certain. Father, she said, I need you to press play. The silence that followed was the specific silence of 200 people understanding simultaneously that something real was happening. Graham went still beside her. Not the still of a man caught. Not yet. The still of a man who had heard a single wrong note and was calculating whether he had heard correctly. He looked at the phone in Nora's hand. He recognized the voice memo app. His face did not change. But something behind his eyes did. The warmth switched off the way you switch off a light. Clean and sudden and complete. Father Callahan looked at the phone. He looked at Nora. He looked at the 200 people in the pews, all of them leaning slightly forward. He pressed play. Graham's voice filled the church. Hey, yeah, I know. Listen, I need you to stay in your seat today. I know it's hard. But once this is done, we're back to normal, okay? We've talked about this. Nora she's not. Look, she doesn't know anything. She's fine. The acoustics of St. Bartholomew's were excellent. The church had been built for large gatherings, and it carried sound beautifully, all the way to the back pew. Every word landed. There was no confusion about what was being heard. There was no ambiguity in the voice, no possibility of misinterpretation. The tone of a man managing a situation. The name Sabrina, spoken with a particular softness that had no place in a phone call made on the morning of your wedding to someone other than the woman you were about to marry. After today, nothing changes between us. I promise. The recording ended. 200 people exhaled. In the front row, Patricia Ashford's face did not move. She was very good at that. But her hands, folded in her lap, tightened once. In the third row, Sabrina Lane was not looking at the altar. She was looking at her program. Her jaw was set. She had heard it too, all of it, including the parts Graham had said to her privately. Hearing them in a church, in front of 200 strangers, arranged them differently. Marcus Webb, standing at the altar, had not moved. He was looking at the floor. Graham turned to Nora, and the warmth that he turned off a moment ago, he tried to turn it back on. Nora, I can explain this. I need you to let me explain. There's nothing to explain, she said. Her voice was steady and quiet. She was not yelling. She did not need to. The church was silent enough that a steady, quiet voice carried perfectly. Your words were very clear. He shifted, his jaw tightened. This isn't... He stopped, recalculated, lowered his voice. You're doing this here? In front of everyone? You're really going to do this here? Yes, she said. The word landed like a stone in still water. Graham Ashford made a decision in the next 10 seconds that would define the next several years of his life. He chose to attack. It happened fast, the pivot that some men make when the ground disappears under them, and dignity feels like a luxury they can no longer afford. His voice stayed low, designed to sound reasonable, designed to sound like the adult in the room. Nora. He said her name like a warning. You need to understand something. What you're doing right now, this is exactly why this wasn't working. You've always done this, looked for reasons to believe the worst. She said nothing. You came from nothing, he said. And those 3 words were careful, measured. He knew how to aim. I tried to give you a real life. My family opened their home to you. I gave you 3 years. And this is how you respond to that? Something shifted in the room. It was not the recording that changed the 200 people in the pews. They had already processed the recording. What changed them was this moment, the tone of those 3 words, the particular calibration of them, the way they were aimed at a woman standing alone at an altar in a dress she had saved for herself. Patricia Ashford remained perfectly still. Marcus Webb looked up from the floor. In the 3rd row, Sabrina Lane finally looked up from her program. Her expression was not what anyone would have expected. It was recognition. Because she had heard variations of those 3 words before, not directed at Nora, directed at her, in private moments, in the subtle way that Graham sometimes reminded Sabrina of what she owed him, what he had done for her, how much worse things would be without his help. She had always explained it away. She sat very still in seat 17, and she listened to the man she had spent 11 months believing, and something that had been blurred for a long time came into focus with complete clarity. Father Callahan had not moved from his position. He was holding Nora's phone. He looked at Nora. She had not responded to Graham's words. She was simply standing, holding her peonies, looking at Graham with an expression that was not hurt and was not angry. It was something closer to finished. The church was still processing. Graham had stopped talking. The silence had a texture to it. The specific texture of 200 people holding a collective breath, uncertain whether to speak or look away or simply bear witness. Then a man in the 3rd row stood up. He was in a charcoal gray suit, 33 years old. Dark eyes that were, to anyone who looked carefully, shaped exactly like Nora's. He had been sitting completely still since the recording played, not paralyzed, but precise, the way engineers are when they are calculating something that matters. He stood up, and the people on either side of him shifted instinctively, the way crowds shift when someone changes the geometry of a space. He looked toward the altar. He said, Nora. Just the name. Nothing else. The way he said it was the way you say the name of someone you have been looking for. She turned. They looked at each other across the length of the nave, across 60 feet of stone and candlelight and 200 silent witnesses. Nora's expression did not understand it yet. she saw a stranger, a man in a gray suit with dark eyes who knew her name. She searched his face for a context that wasn't there. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. He took out a photograph. It was small and slightly worn at the edges. He held it up so she could see it from where she stood, and though 60 feet was too far to see it clearly, she could see enough. 2 children, a man, a woman, a front step. Nora stepped down from the altar. She walked toward him. The 200 people in the pews did not move. They did not make a sound. They watched a woman in an ivory wedding dress walk up the center aisle toward a man holding a photograph. And whatever they had expected from this morning, this was not it. She stopped in front of him. He held the photograph out. She looked at it. She looked at it for a long time. Her hands came up slowly, and she took it from him, and the shake in her hands was the first break in her composure since she had pressed record 4 hours ago. "Where did you get this?" she said. His voice was quiet. "I've been looking for you," he said, "for 6 years." Graham Ashford left St. Bartholomew's Church at 11:47. He walked out through the side door with his jacket in his hand and his best man not beside him, because Marcus Webb was still sitting in the front row and had not moved. Patricia Ashford followed her son at a distance, composed, unhurried, wearing the expression of a woman who was already composing a narrative. No one stopped them. No one needed to. Sabrina Lane did not leave with Graham. She sat in seat 17 for several minutes after the church began to empty, her program folded in her lap, not looking at anything in particular. Then she stood, walked to the side aisle, and left alone through the main doors. She did not look at the altar as she passed it. She had a 45-minute subway ride back to her apartment in the East Village, and she used the time to look at 11 months of text messages in a new light. The way you look at a room you've lived in after the power goes out, and you're seeing it by candlelight for the first time. Same room, different shapes. Back in the church, the 200 guests thinned slowly, in the uncomfortable way of people who have witnessed something they don't have language for. Ushers stood in small clusters near the doors. The string quartet had stopped playing. Nora sat in the third row with Elliot beside her and Jolene on her other side, still holding the photograph. Marcus Webb crossed the nave and stood in the aisle in front of her. He was 58% certain she would not want to speak to him. He came anyway. "I owe you an apology," he said. She looked up. 6 months ago, Graham told me about Sabrina. I was the one who raised it with him. He denied it. I let it go." He paused. "I should not have let it go. That's the only thing I have to say." She looked at him for a long moment. "Why didn't you push harder?" she said. He answered honestly. "Because it was easier not to." She nodded. Not acceptance, something more precise. The acknowledgement of a true answer. The church was nearly empty now. The morning light came through the tall windows and lay in long rectangles across the stone floor. Nora looked at the photograph in her hands. Then she looked at Elliot. "I need about 10 minutes, she said. "And then I want to hear everything." 3 weeks after the wedding that didn't happen, Graham Ashford's professional life began to come apart in the specific way that reputations do. Not all at once, but in pieces, each one loosening the next. It started with the recording. 200 people had heard it. 200 people who included partners at competing architectural firms, a city council member, 2 prominent real estate developers, and a journalist who covered New York business culture for a magazine with a very loyal readership. Nobody published anything directly. Nobody needed to. The information moved the way information moves in certain circles, through a dinner table, a phone call, a casual aside at a conference, and within 3 weeks, Graham found that 3 prospective clients had chosen other firms, and 1 existing client had initiated a quiet conversation about contract terms. The firm's managing partner called him in for a meeting. It was not a comfortable meeting. Sabrina Lane resigned from the firm 2 weeks after the wedding. She sent no explanation, just a standard letter of resignation with 2 weeks' notice. On her last day, she cleaned her desk quietly and left before 6. She did not leave a forwarding address with the receptionist. Graham called her 14 times over the following week. She answered once. She told him that she had been thinking about a number of things, about the way he had spoken about Nora during their 11 months, about the things he had said to make Sabrina feel needed while simultaneously keeping her contained, about the fact that he had invited her to his own wedding and placed her in the 3rd row like a prop. She told him she was moving to Portland. She hung up. Patricia Ashford discovered over the following month that the social landscape she had spent decades cultivating was quieter than usual. Invitations arrived, but fewer of them. Certain phone calls went unreturned. She hosted a dinner party in the Hamptons that was attended by 12 guests instead of the usual 25. She was never publicly criticized. She did not need to be. The people who knew her well enough to understand what she had done also knew her well enough to understand what silence meant. It meant she would feel it. On a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after the wedding, Nora Voss and Elliot Voss sat in a booth at a diner on Steinway Street in Astoria, Queens, and talked for 4 hours and 51 minutes. Nora had chosen the diner because it was 2 blocks from her apartment, and because she knew the table by the window got good light, and because she had learned, a long time ago, that difficult conversations went better in familiar places. She brought the photograph. It was small, 4 inches by 6, slightly faded at the corners. It showed a front step of a narrow row house, the kind common to South Philadelphia. A man and a woman, young, standing close together. In front of them, a girl of about 5 and a boy, barely more than a toddler, sitting on the step below. The girl had her hair in 2 uneven braids, the way hair looks when a child has tried to braid it herself or been braided by someone in a hurry. Nora recognized the front step before she recognized anything else. 1417 Mifflin Street, the house they had lived in before the accident. She had not seen a photograph of it in 23 years. Elliot had found it through a private record search that had taken 3 years and cost him more than he liked to calculate. The search had led him to New York, then to the Pennsylvania foster system records, then to a legal intermediary, then to a DNA matching service where a profile had been sitting unclaimed since 2019. Nora had uploaded her DNA profile in 2019. The match had never been surfaced properly because of a data migration error on the platform's end. Elliot had discovered this 6 weeks ago when he called customer support for the 4th time and was connected to a representative who actually looked at the account. He had been 3 blocks from her apartment for 11 months. They sat in the diner, and they went through it slowly. The group homes, the foster placements, the years of looking. Elliot ordered coffee and didn't drink it. Nora ordered eggs and didn't eat them. At the end, she took the photograph and turned it over. On the back, in handwriting she did not recognize, someone had written 2 words. Come home. She did not know who had written it or when, but she kept it. 6 months after the wedding that didn't happen, Nora Voss had a new client. His name was Marcus Webb. He was a real estate attorney with a practice on Park Avenue, and he needed someone to rewrite the client communications on his firm's website, which had last been updated in 2017 and read, in Nora's professional opinion, like a form letter drafted by someone who had once heard of human emotion but had never personally encountered it. She had not sought out the work. He had emailed her through her professional website in September. 3 months after that Saturday in June, with a subject line that said simply, "Website copy." "I would understand if you don't want to take this, but I thought I'd ask." She had thought about it for 2 days. Then she wrote back, "Send me what you have." They worked together over 6 weeks. 3 in-person meetings at a coffee shop near her apartment, emails, revised drafts. A final version that Marcus said was the first piece of professional writing he had ever read that sounded like an actual person. He paid her invoice the same day she sent it. That was the first thing she noticed about him, professionally. He also asked, in the same email, if she wanted to get dinner. Not as a client, he clarified, but as 2 people who had met under circumstances that deserved to be recontextualized. She thought about it for a day. She said yes. They went to a small Italian place in the West Village, and they talked for 3 hours, and nobody discussed Graham Ashford. They talked about their work, and about the city, and about the particular experience of building something slowly when everything around you seemed designed for speed. Marcus was not like Graham. He was quieter. Less polished at the surface, but more solid underneath. He had made a mistake, the one he had named plainly and without excuse in the church, and he had not spent the subsequent months explaining it away. He had simply lived with it and tried to do better. That mattered to Nora. It wasn't sudden. It wasn't sweeping. It was instead the slow and careful recognition of someone who intended to stay. She found that she was not afraid of it. That was new. 1 year after the wedding that didn't happen, Nora Voss was sitting at her desk in her apartment in Astoria on a Wednesday morning with her second cup of coffee and her laptop, and the particular quiet that she had learned, over 31 years, to treat as something given rather than something owed. Elliot was coming for dinner on Thursday. He lived in Crown Heights, 40 minutes away by subway, which was 40 minutes closer than 6 years of searching had ever managed to get him. They had a standing Thursday dinner. His idea, which he had proposed in the parking lot of the Astoria diner on the afternoon of their first conversation, in the specific way of someone who was afraid that if he didn't pin it down, it would dissolve. She had said yes before he finished asking. Marcus was meeting her for lunch on Friday, which was not yet a pattern, but was starting to look like one, and she had decided that she was comfortable with that. Graham Ashford had left his firm in January. The professional details were quiet and conducted through intermediaries, as these things usually were in certain circles. She did not follow the particulars. She did not need to. She opened a new document, started a sentence. She deleted it, started again. She thought about something she had read once. Marcus Aurelius, from a copy of Meditations that she had found in Ruth's small bookshelf on Carpenter Street at 14 and never returned. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. She had not chosen what happened to her when she was 7 years old. She had not chosen the 11 years in group homes, or the brother taken in a different direction, or the 3 years given to a man who saw her as a prop in a story about himself. But she had chosen, in a bridal suite at the Ritz-Carlton on a Saturday morning in June, to be precise. To be still. To wait for the right moment, and then, without drama, to hand a phone to a priest. That choice was hers. Everything that came after it was hers. If this story stayed with you, the quiet courage in it, the way one clear decision in the middle of the worst morning can change the shape of what follows, then share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And subscribe, because the next story coming is one I think you'll carry with you for a long time. We'll see you there. And so, the story closes. But hey, if you are still here with us right now, truly here, not just letting the video play in the background while you do something else, then I want you to know something. Something in this story touched you. I don't know if it was Nora standing alone in that bridal suite pressing record on her phone. Maybe it was Elliot, sitting in that third row holding a photograph he had carried for 6 years. Maybe it was just the feeling of watching someone take the worst morning of their life and decide, quietly, without screaming, without falling apart, to do it right. And here is the thing I want to sit with you on for just a moment before we go. Marcus Aurelius wrote something that has stayed with me since the first time I read it. He said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Nora could not control what Graham did. She could not undo 3 years. She could not change the fact that a woman she had never met was sitting in the third row of her own wedding. But she could control one thing: the 4 minutes and 12 seconds on her phone, and exactly when she chose to press play. That is not a small thing. That is everything. Here is what I believe after spending so long with this story. The people who betray us almost always count on our silence. They count on our fear of making a scene, our need to protect the version of life we worked so hard to build. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to stay quiet in the exact moment it costs you the most. Nora did not get revenge. She got her life back, her brother, her dignity, and slowly, carefully, something that actually deserved her. That is the ending worth waiting for. If this story meant something to you today, please take 2 seconds and hit that like button right now. It genuinely helps more people find these stories. And if you know someone going through something hard, share this with them. Not because it fixes anything, but because sometimes the best thing we can do for someone is show them that the other side of the worst morning exists. Subscribe if you want to stay. There is another story coming that I think is going to stay with you for a long time. We will see you there. This story is a work of fiction created entirely for entertainment and emotional storytelling purposes. All characters, including Nora Voss, Graham Ashford, Elliot Voss, Jolene Park, Patricia Ashford, Sabrina Lane, and Marcus Webb, are fictional and do not represent any real person, living or deceased. All names, relationships, events, and situations depicted in this video have been invented for narrative purposes only. Any resemblance to actual individuals, real-life events, or existing organizations is purely coincidental and entirely unintentional. The locations referenced, including St. Bartholomew's Church, the Ritz-Carlton, and other named places, are used solely as fictional settings and are not intended to represent those establishments in any factual capacity. No part of this story claims to document, report, or recreate real events. All emotional, legal, and interpersonal situations shown are dramatized for storytelling purposes and should not be taken as factual accounts or real-life advice of any kind. We believe in honest, transparent content. Thank you for watching with that understanding and for trusting us with your time.